Lo tov. Lo tov heyot adam levado. It's not good for a person to be all alone. Wait, I think I've heard that one before. 10 days ago, I spoke about the first flaw in the divine plan. The first man who was created alone, but it turns out he needed a partner, a family, a community, just like we all do. And now on Yom Kippur, I ask, what if maybe, God forbid, God knew what God was doing all along? Is there something to the idea that this whole noisy, chaotic, diverse, terribly beautiful human species was once embodied in a single being? After all, we are the people who have lived and died for the idea of the oneness of God. Certainly, there's something profound to consider in this singular instant in which humanity was also one. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let me start somewhere less intense than the Garden of Eden. Consider instead an anxious 21-year-old with a massive, perpetually messy Jew-fro of hair, back when I had hair, hiding out in the second-floor bathroom of what was then called the University of Judaism, desperately reading and rereading my notes. And then finally, there's a knock at the door, and a voice tells me, "You should probably come out now. The interview is about to begin." A rabbinical school interview panel is a pretty intimidating experience. Mine was stocked with giants: Brad Artson, Elliot Dorff, Naomi Levy, Cheryl Peretz, Aaron Alexander, half a dozen others, all sitting up and down a long boardroom table. Thankfully, they had done away with the old trick where they used to put a water glass in front of you and see if in your nervousness you would remember to bless it before taking a drink. I remember that my hands were shaking as I sat down at that table. Let me tell you, after that, CBI search committee, piece of cake, Mike. The first question came from Rabbi Alexander. So, if you were going to teach just one text for the rest of your life, what would it be and why? And I thought to myself, that's really not fair. I'm coming to you to teach me the texts of our tradition. I'm coming to spend 5 years immersed in Torah and Talmud, Midrash, and mysticism, and then I'll stock my teacher's toolkit with the texts I'll share with the communities I'll serve. But I needed an answer, and so I gave one. And you want to know what? Of all the questions I was asked that day, this is the only one that nearly 2 decades later, I would still answer the exact same way. So on this Kol Nidre night, my first as this community's rabbi, I want to share with you my core text, my constant companion, the place for me from which everything else takes root. It's in your machzor, in a little card you might have noticed. If you got a machzor from the front, I personally stuffed each one of them. If you got a machzor from that side, there were cards out and about. And if you don't have a card or you're following along on Zoom, I will read the text out loud. The words come from the Mishnah, which is the first collection of rabbinic writings compiled after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. As the ruins of the building, which once sent up the smoke of countless sacrifices, continued to burn and smolder, the surviving generation of teachers and sages gathered in a place called Yavna to envision a new world. The masterpiece that took them 120 years to produce was called the Mishnah, and it covered in 63 tractates every conceivable aspect of what it takes to construct a Jewish society. They wrote about matters as lofty as God and prayer, and as mundane as what you're supposed to do when you find someone's lost garment or runaway cow. They laid out the rules of Shabbat and Kashrut, along with the systems of ritual, family, property, and even criminal law. And it's in the middle of one of those discussions of criminal procedure that the rabbis go off on a bit of a tangent. Imagine that, rabbis on a tangent. And they wind up saying something so profound about the value and meaning of human life that I believe its message has never quite been equaled. And that's where we begin. Lefichach nivra Adam yechidi. Therefore was the first human being created alone, if you want to follow along in the text. God might have created Adam together with a partner, or a minion, or a village. Certainly that would have been a safer strategy. One is just so vulnerable. Imagine that Adam was created and then promptly consumed by a saber-toothed tiger. Or imagine that he turned out to be unable to obey just one simple rule about some fruit better left on the tree. But God, the rabbis say, doesn't make mistakes. Instead, God created Adam alone in the garden in order to teach us something about the value of each and every human life, about the power of one. And therefore, was the first human being created in order to teach you that whosoever destroys a single life, the Torah considers it as though they destroyed the entire world, and whosoever saves a single life, it is though they saved the entire world. Listen to how audacious this claim really is. Each human being, from the most powerful king to the beggar at the gate, rich and poor, young and old, famous and utterly unknown, is to be regarded as having infinite, nearly unimaginable worth. How do we begin to understand the concept of one human being as an entire world? On the biological level, one human being has at least the theoretical capacity to bring forth countless future generations. Within your own family tree, your existence depends not just on parents and grandparents, but on an unbroken lineage of hundreds of generations. Should your 10th or 100th great-grandfather have failed to really impress your 10th or 100th great-grandmother, the entire history that led up to you would have ceased in that moment to be. Some scientists studying the mitochondria in our cells believe they're coming closer to pinpointing one woman living on the plains of East Africa more than 100,000 years ago, who is ancestor to every living human being on the planet. One life, an entire world. But this passage makes clear that the infinite value of each life is a universal truth, and therefore not just limited to those who have children. Many people, by choice, and some very much not by choice, do not become literal ancestors. And yet the rabbis see all of us as equally valuable because there is far more than one way to birth something new into the world. The impact of our lives, like ripples in still water, extends far beyond us, oftentimes without us even knowing how far they might travel. I suspect that everyone in this room can easily draw to mind someone who has touched your life for whom you might be little more than a footnote. But for you they made all the difference. Maybe it was a teacher for whom you were one of thousands who passed through her classroom, but she made you feel that you mattered, and that wasn't something you heard a whole lot at home. and that was the buoy that kept you from sinking under the waves. Maybe it was a teenage romance that lasted a few short summer weeks, and who knows where they wound up or if they even still think of me, but which forever shaped our sense of what it is to love and to be loved. The scientist who you'll never have a chance to know, but who contributed to the cancer drug that gave you 20 more good years with your sister. The beloved writer, long dead, whose books opened up worlds of imagination to you when you were small and inspired you to teach your children and grandchildren to be lovers of story. We are bound together, by what Rabbi Larry Kushner calls invisible lines of connection, a web of gossamer threads that gently tug and nudge us along to become the people we were put on earth to be. And just as others have been essential to your journey to this moment, you have been too. I promise. No life is insignificant. There is no one who has not, at some time or another, been another person's angel. Infinitely valuable, unspeakably precious. And so if we're to take this text as more than just beautiful poetry, if we're to take it seriously as a matter of religious doctrine, then on this day of reflection, we need to ask ourselves how we can be partners in constructing a world in which all people are in fact treated as infinitely valuable. My teacher, Rabbi Sharon Brous, who I've heard expound this text many times, often uses the following thought experiment. She says, imagine that you're a very, 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 very wealthy person. So wealthy that you have just purchased the most expensive painting ever sold at auction. The current record holder, by the way, 2016, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman purchased Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi for $450 million. Many people now think it's a forgery. He doesn't get his money back. Imagine that you have just purchased an old master worth nearly $500 million, and you're taking it home in the back seat of your car, carefully seat-belted, of course, and you arrive at the front door, but the artwork is heavy, and you're by yourself. And so you decide to prop it in the alley behind the house overnight until your brother-in-law can come in the morning to help you schlep it to the perfect spot upstairs. We laugh. What would we say about a person who leaves such a painting in an alley, a crazy fool, a mashugana? We wouldn't leave something worth hundreds of millions of dollars in an alley. We wouldn't leave something worth a slightly more modest $10 or $20 million in an alley. We wouldn't leave something worth $10,000 in an alley. We wouldn't leave something worth $10 in an alley if we could help it. And knowing that to be true, how do we grapple then with the fact that tonight, in the state of California, 160,000 human beings, including 40,000 children, will spend the night unhoused on dangerous city streets, exposed to wind and weather and all manners of violence and abuse? I bring that up not because our ancient texts prescribe specific policy solutions to solve homelessness or any of our other modern plagues, but simply to remind us, and me too, that we can't both consider ourselves bound by this tradition and indifferent to this essential element of it. As inheritors of these texts, we are called to hold to account a culture that renders far too many people invisible. Old people, poor people, disabled people, sick people. People who look different or love different or live different or think different than we do. The stranger, the outsider, the marginalized, the oppressed. That we who profess to believe that all people are made in the image of God have an obligation to be part of bringing us all closer to a world where everyone can live out that full measure of dignity. The text continues. Umipnei shalom habriot, shalo yomar adam lechavero, abba gadol me'avicha. And it's also for the sake of peace among people, so that no one can say to their fellow, my parent was greater than yours. If the first part of this text teaches that all human beings have infinite worth, then the second part speaks to inherent equality. This is the fundamental incompatibility, I believe, the fundamental incompatibility between religion and racism. When whole groups are treated as less worthy of God's blessing than others, there is a rupture in the essential fabric of our humanity. Prejudice of any kind is a denial of the spiritual truth, and it turns out the biological truth that we all come from one source, that the blood that runs through our veins is essentially one, that we are all God's children, and God, a good parent, doesn't play favorites. And what's more, if we are all children of a single parent, then what does that make us to each other? Nothing other than family. And while Lord knows we don't have to like every member of our family equally, and thank God for that, we do have to show up for them. Being part of a family means that there are people in the world who have our backs, and we have theirs, who will come when we call, with whom we share the long road. This text invites us to see one another as all members of one great human mishpacha, united by collective history and common destiny, which links us all one to the other as siblings, with all the blessings and responsibilities of sisterhood and brotherhood. And finally, Adam was created alone to show the greatness of the Holy One. For if a person strikes many coins from one mold, they all come out the same. But the Holy One made each person in the image of the original Adam, and yet not one resembles their fellow. Therefore, each and every person is obligated to say, Bishvili nivra haolam, for my sake was the world created. There have been a few social experiments that have attempted to achieve a society in which all are treated as equally valuable by flattening our differences and claiming that equality requires sameness. That's not our people's path. The rabbis speak of unity, not uniformity. The dazzling diversity of humanity is a testimony to the artistry of the Creator, not a challenge to the social order. In a room full of hundreds of souls, none of us share the same eyes, and none of us share the same fingerprints. Our voices are different, our minds are different. And if this room was expanded 100 times or 1,000, that would still be so. The unique collection of aptitudes, of challenges, of attitudes, of experiences that make up singular, irreplaceable you is both unprecedented and never to be repeated. You are a one of a kind. And the Mishnah insists that it's possible to be infinitely valuable, totally equal, and still completely ourselves. And so finally, I turn attention to the last line of this text, in which we say, for my sake the world was created. I have long believed that this is a call to service. A rabbinic commentary expounding on the selection of Abraham as the father of the covenant remarks, there is not a single person who does not have a unique corner of the world that needs a light that only they can bring. The world was made for you means that it was made with a purpose that only you can fulfill, a healing that only we can effect. When I name and bless a new baby, I always say, may you grow, little one, to know that the world is impoverished if you are not yourself. I pray that for each and every one of us. This Mishnah from Tractate Sanhedrin is my home. It's my core text, my Jewish mission statement. Everything, truly everything in my religious life ultimately comes back to its principles, to the belief that every human life is infinitely valuable, that we are equal members of a shared family, and that we each have a purpose to fulfill in God's beautifully diverse world. Every Shabbat reminds me of the first principle, that our worth is not defined by what we have in our pockets, by our outputs, by our accolades, by our titles or degrees, that our worth is intrinsic, inalienable, a fundamental part of the package of what it means to be made B'Tselem Elohim. Pesach is nothing if not a reminder of the second principle, that all human beings are family with one origin, and therefore the way of thinking that allows one group to subjugate another is sheer blasphemy. In God's world, there are no masters or slaves. Rather, we are equally beloved children of a shared parent, all meant to shine. And finally, it's in learning Torah with others that I am most clearly reminded of our beautiful differences. I have never once sat and studied a text with another and not been struck by an insight I never would have come to on my own. A facet of the diamond that could only be unlocked through someone else's eyes. It's in the great symphony of the study hall that each person plays their part, and the music swells with the majesty of all the diverse voices. And so this is my core text. It's who I am and what I feel called to live up to. And now what I want to know is what's yours? On what foundation is your Judaism built? What idea motivates you, challenges you, wakes you up in the morning, and keeps you up at night? I want to take this opportunity to invite you to a year of learning on that topic. We'll launch it in November, and we'll explore our core texts with each other. I want to spend this first year as your community's rabbi introducing myself through my texts. And I'm looking forward to inviting a few exceptional teachers of Torah to do the same. But much more importantly than what I have to share, I look forward to strengthening our connections with each other as a community by asking all who are prepared to participate to dig deep and to share of yourself, your core texts, your songs, your poems, your prayers, your truths, the foundation stone on which everything is laid. I hope that you'll join me. May we plant ourselves together in rich soil, and may our roots grow strong and deep. May our tradition ennoble us, challenge us, frustrate us, invite us to grow toward the light. May we be blessed to spend our days osek b'Torah, busy in the garden of our people's ancestral wisdom. And may we flourish together for many long years in joy. Gemar Chatima Tova.